Get out of that seat before security drags you off this airplane. Rebecca Sloane's voice cracked through the quiet first-class cabin like a blade, loud enough to turn every head before the boarding door had even closed. Danielle Brooks looked up slowly from seat 1A, one hand resting on the armrest she had legally purchased weeks earlier. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply held Rebecca's stare with the calm expression of someone who had lived through this moment more times than anyone in that cabin could imagine. Around them, conversations died. Champagne glasses paused halfway to waiting hands. The low hum of the aircraft suddenly felt heavier than the engines ever could. A businessman in an expensive navy suit standing beside the aisle smiled, as if the confrontation had already been decided. Ethan Cole adjusted his tailored jacket and pointed toward Danielle's seat. "I believe that's mine," he said confidently. "There must have been a mistake." Rebecca nodded without checking her tablet again. "There wasn't a mistake, sir. We'll have this resolved immediately." Danielle reached into her jacket and calmly held out her boarding pass. "You haven't scanned this since I boarded," she said evenly. Rebecca barely glanced at it before folding her arms. "Ma'am, first class is reserved for confirmed premium passengers. Economy is toward the back." A few nearby passengers exchanged uncomfortable looks. The scanner at the boarding door had flashed green less than 2 minutes earlier. A young flight attendant named Megan Foster had watched it happen with her own eyes. She opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, then stopped when Rebecca shot her a warning glance. Danielle remained seated. "My boarding pass scanned successfully," she replied. "Then you'll have no problem moving while we sort it out," Rebecca answered. Ethan stepped closer, already placing his leather briefcase into the overhead bin above seat 1A as though the decision belonged to him. "People hold up flights every day trying to get upgrades," he muttered, loud enough for several rows to hear. Danielle looked toward the illuminated clock above the cockpit door. 6:18 p.m. Boarding would end in 5 minutes. Her eyes lingered there for only a second before returning to Rebecca. "You're making a serious mistake," she said quietly. Rebecca gave a dismissive laugh. "I've been doing this for 15 years. I know exactly what I'm looking at." Danielle slowly slipped her phone from her pocket. Rebecca immediately stepped forward. "No calls until we finish this." Danielle didn't move. She simply unlocked the screen and looked back at the flight attendant. "In exactly 30 minutes, she said, her voice steady enough to silence the whispers spreading through the cabin. "None of your airplanes will be leaving the ground." A few passengers chuckled, assuming it was an empty threat. Ethan actually laughed out loud. "Sure," he said, "and I'm buying the airport tonight." Rebecca smiled with the confidence of someone who believed authority could never be questioned. "Security will be here in a moment." Danielle nodded once, almost sympathetically. She glanced at the clock again. 6:19 p.m. The countdown had already begun, even though no one around her realized they were witnessing the first minute of the biggest operational shutdown Aurelia Air had faced in its history. 11 minutes earlier, Danielle Brooks had walked into the terminal wearing dark jeans, a charcoal sweater, and comfortable sneakers, carrying nothing more than a slim laptop bag. No assistant. No executive escort. No luxury luggage. Exactly as she intended. Today wasn't a business trip. It was a test. And before the sun finished setting beyond the runway, the people determined to prove she didn't belong in first class would discover they had been judging the wrong passenger all along. 11 minutes earlier, Danielle Brooks had stepped through Terminal C without attracting a single glance. That was exactly how she preferred it. She had built Aurelia Air into one of the fastest-growing airlines in the country, yet almost no one outside executive circles recognized her face. The company advertisements featured destinations, employees, and passengers. They never featured the woman who signed the decisions behind them. Danielle believed leadership was measured by what customers experienced when no executive was watching. That belief had brought her to Gate B14 carrying only a slim laptop bag and a standard boarding pass printed under her real name. 6 months earlier, a report had landed on her desk containing 47 passenger complaints that all sounded strangely similar. None of the travelers knew one another. They came from different cities, different professions, and different backgrounds. Yet every complaint ended with nearly identical language from internal records stating that the passenger could not verify premium status. Danielle had asked for every supporting document. Something bothered her immediately. Several reservation histories appeared to change after boarding had already been completed. Someone inside the system was editing passenger records after legitimate travelers had taken their seats. The technology team insisted it was isolated human error. The legal department could not prove discrimination. Customer relations quietly settled a few claims and closed the files. Danielle refused to accept that explanation. She had spent her career believing that systems reflected the people trusted to operate them. If a pattern existed, it was her responsibility to uncover it. Instead of announcing another audit, she booked an ordinary flight from Chicago to Los Angeles using her own account, her own payment method, and no executive notification. Not even the airport manager knew she would be there. Naomi Price, her executive assistant, had argued against traveling alone. Danielle simply smiled and told her that truth behaved differently when it thought nobody important was watching. Before leaving headquarters that morning, she had given Naomi only one instruction. If anything unusual happened, preserve every digital record exactly as it appeared. No corrections, no quiet fixes, no advance warnings. Let people make their own choices first. Boarding began precisely on schedule. The gate agent greeted Danielle with a polite smile, scanned her boarding pass, and the screen flashed bright green. Seat 1 Alpha confirmed. Megan Foster, the newest member of the cabin crew, welcomed her aboard and pointed toward the front of the aircraft. Danielle thanked her, placed her laptop bag beneath the seat, and settled in quietly. She noticed Rebecca Sloan almost immediately. The senior flight attendant never greeted her. Instead, Rebecca looked from Danielle's sweater to her sneakers before glancing toward the passenger manifest on her tablet. Her expression changed for only a fraction of a second, but Danielle recognized it instantly. She had seen that same silent calculation years earlier when a luxury hotel questioned her reservation, when a banker asked whether her account actually belonged to her, and when a real estate broker assumed she was attending an open house as cleaning staff instead of the buyer. Different cities, different faces. The same hesitation, the same judgment delivered before a single word had been exchanged. Danielle remained perfectly still because experience had taught her something valuable. Bias always revealed itself eventually when it believed nobody was paying attention. Rebecca tapped her screen once, frowned slightly, then looked toward the boarding door where Ethan Cole had just entered the aircraft wearing an expensive tailored suit and carrying himself with complete confidence. Rebecca smiled warmly at him, then looked back at Danielle. A quiet decision had already been made long before the first accusation was spoken aloud. Danielle noticed Rebecca's thumb pause over one field on the tablet before pressing it. For the briefest instant, a small code appeared on the display. C-17. Then the screen changed. Danielle did not react, but every instinct she possessed told her that those two characters were the reason she had boarded this flight in the first place. Rebecca Sloan kept her eyes on the tablet, but Danielle Brooks noticed something almost no one else would have caught. The passenger manifest had refreshed twice within 3 seconds. That was unusual. Flight manifests were supposed to lock once boarding began unless a gate agent made an authorized change. Rebecca was neither surprised nor confused by the update. She expected it. Danielle watched her thumb hover over the same field again before the screen disappeared against her side. Whatever C-17 meant, it was being used deliberately. Megan Foster noticed it too. She had been trained only 4 months earlier, and one lesson had been repeated more than any other. Never alter a passenger record after boarding without authorization from operations. Yet Rebecca acted as though the rule did not exist. Megan glanced toward Danielle's boarding pass, then toward the tablet, trying to understand why the information no longer matched. Ethan Cole smiled impatiently from the aisle. "Is everything ready now?" he asked. Rebecca answered him with confidence she had never shown Danielle. "Just a routine adjustment, sir. Thank you for your patience." Danielle finally spoke. "Adjustment to what?" Rebecca looked directly at her. "Your reservation is under verification." Danielle remained calm. "It was verified when your gate agent scanned it." Rebecca shrugged. "The system sometimes catches inconsistencies afterward." Danielle extended her phone, opening the airline application. Seat 1 Alpha still appeared under her account. Confirmation number. Payment receipt. Boarding completed. Every detail remained intact. Rebecca barely looked before shaking her head. "Our internal records say something different." Across the aisle, an older couple exchanged uncertain glances. They had watched Danielle board without incident only minutes earlier. Another passenger quietly whispered, Did something happen? No one answered. The atmosphere inside the premium cabin no longer felt welcoming. It felt like a courtroom where one side had already decided the verdict. Megan stepped forward carefully. "Rebecca," she said quietly. "I remember her scan. It showed approved." Rebecca's expression hardened immediately. "Thank you, Megan. I will handle this." The younger flight attendant hesitated. Training told her to respect senior crew members. Her conscience told her something else. Danielle noticed the conflict in Megan's face, but remained silent. People revealed themselves best when they believed they were making their own decisions. Rebecca turned back toward Danielle. "Please gather your belongings." Danielle did not move. "On what basis?" "Pending verification." "Verification of what?" Rebecca could not answer immediately. For the first time, there was a pause. A small one, barely noticeable, but it was enough. Danielle recognized it as the moment when confidence became improvisation. Ethan cleared his throat dramatically. "We are delaying an entire flight over one passenger." Rebecca nodded as though that settled everything. "Exactly." Danielle slowly looked toward the cockpit door, then back to Rebecca. "No," she replied. "You are delaying this flight because someone changed a record that was already verified." Rebecca's smile disappeared. "Are you accusing my crew of misconduct?" Danielle answered without emotion. "I am asking who authorized the change." Silence settled over the front cabin again. Megan looked down at the backup service tablet resting inside the galley cabinet. Company policy required every update to leave a digital timestamp. If someone had altered Danielle's reservation, the system would know exactly when it happened. Rebecca followed Megan's eyes for only an instant before quickly stepping between her and the cabinet. That single movement told Danielle more than any explanation ever could. Then Rebecca reached for the intercom phone mounted beside the galley and calmly pressed a button. "Captain Whitaker," she said, her voice steady and professional. "I need you in first class immediately. We have a passenger refusing crew instructions." Danielle did not interrupt. She simply watched the cockpit door unlock, knowing that whatever happened next would determine whether this was the mistake of one employee or the failure of something much larger. Captain Thomas Whitaker stepped out of the cockpit with the measured confidence of someone accustomed to ending disagreements in seconds. He took one look at Rebecca Sloan, then at Danielle Brooks, and instinctively positioned himself beside his senior flight attendant instead of between the two women. Danielle noticed the choice immediately. It was subtle, but it mattered. People often revealed their conclusions before asking their first question. "What seems to be the issue?" the captain asked. Rebecca answered before Danielle had the chance. "She refuses to comply with crew instructions after a reservation discrepancy appeared during boarding verification." Captain Whitaker nodded slowly as though the explanation already sounded complete. Danielle met his eyes without the slightest hint of frustration. "Captain, my boarding pass scanned successfully. My reservation is still confirmed on my account. I simply asked who altered my seat assignment after I boarded." The captain extended his hand. Danielle handed him her boarding pass. He examined it carefully. Everything appeared legitimate. Her identification matched. The confirmation number matched. The seat printed clearly read 1 Alpha. For a brief moment, uncertainty crossed his face. Then Rebecca quietly turned her tablet toward him. Whatever appeared on that screen immediately changed his expression. He handed the boarding pass back. "Our internal records show your reservation is under review," he said. Danielle tilted her head slightly. "Would you mind telling me why?" The captain hesitated. "I do not have those details." Danielle answered calmly. "Then you do not know whether the information is accurate." The silence lingered just long enough for several nearby passengers to begin paying closer attention. Claire Bennett, seated in the second row, slowly reached into her handbag and pulled out her phone. She did not raise it dramatically. She simply rested it on her lap with the camera facing forward. Across the aisle, Jordan Ellis folded his newspaper and watched the exchange carefully. He had boarded just after Danielle and remembered seeing the boarding scanner flash green. Something about the situation no longer made sense. Megan Foster stood quietly near the galley, her heart racing faster with every passing second. She knew there was one way to determine exactly what had happened. Every reservation update generated an automatic timestamp that could be viewed from the secondary service terminal. Rebecca had blocked access to it only moments earlier, but while everyone's attention remained fixed on the captain, Megan slowly stepped backward into the galley. She unlocked the backup tablet with her crew credentials and opened the activity log. Her eyes widened almost immediately. Danielle Brooks. Boarding complete. 6:17 in the evening. Seat 1 Alpha confirmed. Then another entry appeared exactly 43 seconds later. Reservation status manually changed. Verification hold. User identification, Rebecca Sloan. Megan stared at the screen, hardly believing what she was reading. No system error. No automatic correction. A manual change. She quietly captured a screenshot before the record could disappear. At that same moment, another line caught her attention. Internal classification applied. C-17. Megan searched the code reference. Instead of opening a definition, the system displayed a restricted access warning reserved for management authorization. Her stomach tightened. Flight attendants were never supposed to see hidden classifications attached to passengers. Claire noticed Megan's expression from across the cabin and realized something important had just been discovered. Jordan leaned slightly into the aisle. "Captain," he said respectfully, "if there is evidence, maybe everyone should slow down before asking anyone to leave their seat." Captain Whitaker looked toward Rebecca, waiting for reassurance. Rebecca answered without missing a beat. "Passengers do not have access to operational procedures." Danielle never took her eyes off the captain. "No," she said quietly, "but your crew does. And one of them just found something that you have not seen yet." Every head in first class turned toward the galley as Megan slowly emerged, holding the backup tablet against her chest, knowing that whatever appeared on its screen was about to change everything. Megan Foster stopped 3 feet from Captain Whitaker, both hands wrapped around the backup tablet, as though letting go might erase what she had just discovered. The cabin had become so quiet that even the distant sound of luggage being placed into overhead bins outside the aircraft seemed unusually loud. Rebecca Sloan took one quick step toward her. "That device is for crew use only," she said sharply. Megan did not hand it over. Instead, she looked at the captain. "Sir, the reservation was changed after boarding was completed." Captain Whitaker frowned. "Are you certain?" Megan nodded. "The activity log shows the exact time." Seat 1 Alpha was confirmed. 43 seconds later, the status was manually changed to verification hold. Rebecca immediately folded her arms. "You are misreading the system." Megan swallowed hard but refused to lower her eyes. The log also records the user identification that made the change. No one spoke. Rebecca's confidence flickered for the first time that evening. Danielle Brooks remained seated, her expression unchanged, allowing the facts to carry the weight instead of her voice. Captain Whitaker reached for the tablet. Before Megan could hand it over, Rebecca interrupted again. "Captain, she is a trainee. She does not understand restricted operational procedures." Danielle finally spoke. "Then let the record explain itself." The captain hesitated. He could feel the attention of every passenger in the front cabin. Claire Bennett quietly continued recording from her seat without saying a word. Jordan Ellis leaned slightly into the aisle, waiting to see whether evidence would matter more than assumption. Captain Whitaker looked at Megan once more. "Show me." Megan turned the screen toward him. His eyes moved slowly across each line. Boarding completed. Seat 1 Alpha confirmed. Manual status modification. User identification attached. Timestamp verified. His expression changed almost immediately. Then he noticed the final line beneath the modification. Internal classification applied. C-17. He looked up at Rebecca. "What is C-17? Rebecca answered almost too quickly. "It is an internal quality control marker." Danielle asked quietly. "Then why is access to its definition restricted?" Rebecca had no immediate answer. Captain Whitaker attempted to open the classification file, but the screen displayed an authorization warning requiring executive clearance. His forehead tightened. He had flown for nearly 3 decades and had never encountered that restriction attached to an ordinary passenger reservation. Danielle watched him carefully. She recognized the moment doubt entered his mind. She also knew doubt alone was not enough. People still had to choose whether to follow truth or convenience. Ethan Cole broke the silence with an impatient sigh. "Captain, are we really holding an entire airplane because of one computer issue?" Rebecca seized the opportunity. "Exactly. We can resolve this after departure. We simply need the passenger to relocate temporarily." Danielle slowly turned toward the captain. "You now know my original reservation was altered after I boarded. You know the modification was manual. You know neither of you can explain the classification attached to my record. You have enough information to stop this before it becomes something much larger. Captain Whitaker looked from Danielle to Rebecca, then toward the closed cockpit door. Outside, the departure clock continued counting down. On-time performance. Hundreds of connecting passengers. A full aircraft waiting behind him. Every year of his career had taught him that delays created problems. Every fact now sitting on Megan's tablet told him this delay had already exposed one. He closed his eyes for only a second before making his decision. "Rebecca," he said quietly, "continue preparing the cabin." Then he turned to Danielle. "Ma'am, I am instructing you to leave seat 1 Alpha until this matter can be reviewed after landing." Danielle did not argue. She simply looked at the illuminated clock above the cockpit door. 6:23 in the evening. Exactly on schedule. Then she looked back at the captain with calm certainty and asked one final question. "Captain Whitaker, is that your final decision?" Danielle Brooks held Captain Whitaker's gaze without the slightest trace of anger. She had asked him one simple question, and now the entire cabin waited for his answer. The captain drew a slow breath before replying. "Yes, that is my final decision." Danielle nodded once, almost as though she had expected nothing else. "Thank you, Captain," she said quietly. "I needed to hear you say it." Rebecca Sloan smiled with visible relief. To her, the confrontation was finally ending. She gestured toward the aisle. "Please collect your belongings." Danielle remained seated for one more moment, then reached calmly into her laptop bag and removed her phone. Rebecca immediately stepped forward again. "You may not delay boarding any further." Danielle looked up. "I am making one business call." Rebecca laughed softly. "Business can wait until we land." Danielle unlocked the phone anyway and selected a single contact. Naomi Price answered before the first ring had fully ended. "Naomi speaking." Danielle's voice never rose above a calm conversation. "Blackbird Protocol. Level 4. Preserve all records connected to Flight 412. Freeze every activity associated with internal code C-17. There was no surprise on the other end. "Confirmed," Naomi replied immediately. "Executive authentication recognized. Preservation sequence is now active." Danielle ended the call without another word and slipped the phone back into her pocket. Ethan Cole shook his head with an amused smile. "That was dramatic." Rebecca folded her arms. "Whoever you called cannot change airline policy." Danielle answered with complete certainty. "No, but they can preserve evidence before anyone has the opportunity to erase it." Thousands of miles away at Aurelia Air headquarters, Naomi Price was already moving. Within seconds, encrypted alerts reached the Executive Legal Department, Corporate Compliance, Information Security, and the Airline Operations Center. Every digital record connected to Flight 412 was copied into protected storage. Editing privileges disappeared one after another across the operating network. A software engineer monitoring reservation traffic noticed something unusual. The code Danielle had mentioned appeared again. C-17. Not once. Not twice. 86 active passenger records across 14 airports contained the same hidden classification. Naomi's expression changed. This was no isolated incident. She immediately connected Victor Hale, chairman of the board, to the secure conference line. "Danielle found it," she said. "The code exists across the network." Victor did not hesitate. "Lock everything. Nobody modifies another reservation until we know exactly what this is." Back inside the aircraft, no one knew what had just begun. Rebecca continued preparing the cabin for departure. Flight attendants secured overhead bins. The boarding door remained open for the last few passengers. Captain Whitaker returned toward the cockpit, believing the situation had finally been resolved. Only Megan Foster remained uneasy. She quietly refreshed the backup tablet. A red notification suddenly appeared across the top of the screen. Editing functions disabled by executive preservation order. She blinked in disbelief. No station manager had authority to issue that command. No airport supervisor could activate it. Rebecca noticed Megan staring at the screen again. "What is it now?" Megan slowly turned the tablet around. Every manual editing option had disappeared. Across the top of the display, bold red letters stretched from one side of the screen to the other. "Operational preservation active. Executive authorization verified." Rebecca's smile faded. Captain Whitaker stopped halfway to the cockpit and looked back. Before anyone could speak, Every crew tablet inside the aircraft chimed at exactly the same moment, followed by a second alert echoing from the cockpit itself. And for the first time that evening, the captain realized someone far above the airport had just entered the conversation. The chime echoed through the cabin once, then again. Then every crew tablet illuminated with the same crimson banner that none of the flight attendants had ever seen outside annual emergency simulations. Rebecca Sloan stared at her screen as the words refused to disappear. Operational preservation active. Executive authorization verified. She tapped the display repeatedly, but every command returned the same response. Editing privileges suspended. Captain Thomas Whitaker turned back from the cockpit, his confident stride replaced by measured uncertainty. "What is happening?" he asked. Megan Foster quietly answered before anyone else could. "Someone with executive authority has frozen the entire flight record." Rebecca immediately shook her head. "That is impossible." Danielle Brooks remained seated, her hands folded calmly in her lap. "No," she replied. "It is very possible." Before another word could be exchanged, the cockpit phone rang. Not the routine operations line, not airport dispatch, the secure executive channel. Captain Whitaker hesitated for only a second before stepping into the cockpit. The cabin door remained partially open, allowing everyone in first class to hear fragments of the conversation. Captain Whitaker speaking. A calm voice answered from the other end. "This is Victor Hale, chairman of the board for Aurelia Air Holdings. Put the call on speaker immediately." The captain froze. Victor Hale never contacted active flights directly unless the situation affected the airline itself. Slowly, almost mechanically, he pressed the speaker button. The voice filled the front cabin. "Captain, before you continue preparing Flight 412 for departure, I need confirmation. Is Danielle Brooks currently on your aircraft?" The captain looked toward Danielle, then answered cautiously. "Yes, sir. She is seated in first class." Victor continued without raising his voice. "Is she being denied the seat she lawfully purchased?" Silence answered him. Rebecca opened her mouth, but no words came out. Finally, the captain replied, "There is an ongoing reservation dispute." Victor's tone became even calmer. "Captain, there is no reservation dispute. Our preserved records confirm that Ms. Brooks boarded legally, occupied seat 1 Alpha legally, and had her reservation manually altered after boarding by a member of your crew." Rebecca's face drained of color. Ethan Cole slowly lowered the smile that had remained on his face since boarding. Every passenger leaned forward without realizing it. Victor continued, "Captain Whitaker, Danielle Brooks is not simply a passenger. She is the chief executive officer of Aurelia Air Holdings." The words settled over the cabin with breathtaking stillness. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the distant sounds from the terminal seemed to disappear. Rebecca stared at Danielle as though seeing her for the first time. "No," she whispered almost instinctively. "That cannot be right." Danielle finally stood, smoothing the sleeve of her charcoal sweater with quiet composure. There was no triumph in her expression, only disappointment. She looked directly at Rebecca before speaking. "You denied me a seat on an airline I helped build. But that is not why this conversation matters." Her eyes shifted toward Captain Whitaker. "The real problem is that every piece of evidence placed in front of you pointed toward the truth, and convenience still mattered more than fairness." Megan stepped forward with the backup tablet still in her hands. "Captain," she said softly, "there is something else." She opened another preserved record that had become accessible only after executive authorization. A detailed audit appeared across the screen showing dozens of previous reservations carrying the same hidden classification. Passenger after passenger, airport after airport, the same mysterious code. C-17. Danielle looked at the screen for only a moment before raising her eyes again. "What happened to me today," she said quietly, "did not begin with me. And unless we stop it now, it will not end with me either." At that exact moment, another alert flashed across every display in the aircraft, this one larger than the first, carrying a message that made Captain Whitaker's hands slowly fall to his sides. Nationwide operational hold initiated pending executive safety review. For several long seconds, nobody inside the aircraft spoke. The only sound came from the steady ventilation flowing through the cabin, while every screen continued displaying the same message. Nationwide operational hold initiated pending executive safety review. Captain Thomas Whitaker slowly lowered the cockpit phone, his shoulders noticeably heavier than they had been only moments earlier. He looked toward Danielle Brooks again, but this time he was no longer looking at a passenger. He was looking at the person responsible for the company whose uniform he proudly wore. Rebecca Sloan stood frozen beside the aisle, still gripping her tablet even though every function had been locked. Ethan Cole quietly removed his briefcase from the overhead compartment above seat 1 Alpha without anyone asking him to. The confidence that had carried him onto the airplane had disappeared completely. Danielle broke the silence with the same calm voice she had used from the beginning. The airplanes were not paused because I was denied a seat. They were paused because evidence of a possible system failure must be preserved before it can be altered. Victor Hale remained on the speaker. Captain, effective immediately, Flight 412 will remain at the gate until investigators complete an initial review. Rebecca Sloan is relieved of all active crew responsibilities pending investigation. Her system credentials have already been suspended. Rebecca instinctively touched the identification badge clipped to her uniform. The small indicator light had changed from green to red. She pressed it against the crew tablet, but the device displayed access denied. Her breathing became shallow. "There has to be some mistake," she whispered. Victor answered evenly. The mistake occurred when a confirmed passenger's reservation was manually altered without lawful justification. Another notification appeared across Megan Foster's backup tablet. Historical audit available. She opened it carefully. Row after row filled the screen. Different airports, different flights, different passengers. The same hidden classification. C-17. Many of the passenger photographs showed Black travelers, Latino families, older customers dressed casually, and business travelers whose appearance did not match someone's assumption of what premium service should look like. Megan looked up slowly, struggling to process what she was seeing. "It was never just one flight," she said quietly. Danielle nodded. "That is why preserving the records mattered more than winning an argument." Jordan Ellis stood from his seat. "So this has been happening to other people?" Danielle answered honestly. "That is exactly what we are about to find out." Claire Bennett lowered her phone for the first time since she started recording. She looked around the cabin and said softly, "The frightening part is not that someone made one bad decision. It is that everyone kept calling it procedure." Captain Whitaker closed his eyes briefly before speaking. "Ms. Brooks, I owe you an apology." Danielle met his eyes without satisfaction. "Captain, your apology belongs in the investigation, together with every decision made before you knew my title." He understood immediately. She was not asking for special treatment because she was the chief executive officer. She was asking for every ordinary passenger who never had the opportunity to make a single phone call. Outside the aircraft windows, movement across the airport had almost stopped. Aircraft remained parked at their gates. Pushback vehicles waited motionless. Ground crews stood together looking at their radios, trying to understand why departures across the Aurelia network had suddenly been paused. Danielle glanced toward the terminal clock. Exactly 30 minutes had passed since Rebecca first told her she did not belong in first class. She took one slow breath before looking back toward the cockpit. "This review does not end here," she said. "Find the person who created C-17. At that exact moment, Victor Hale's voice returned over the speaker, quieter than before, but carrying even greater weight. "Danielle, we have identified the executive who authorized the classification. Security has just informed us that he is attempting to leave headquarters." Victor Hale's words settled over the silent cabin with unmistakable finality. Security has intercepted him before he reached the parking garage. His access has been revoked. Corporate investigators are now securing every device connected to the C-17 program. Danielle Brooks closed her eyes for only a moment. It was not relief she felt. It was resolve. She had suspected that the code represented something larger than one employee's prejudice. Now she knew it had been quietly woven into a process that should have protected every passenger equally. Captain Thomas Whitaker slowly stepped toward Danielle. His voice was lower than before. "I should have stopped this when the evidence first appeared." Danielle looked at him with neither anger nor satisfaction. "You had several opportunities to choose facts over assumptions. Leadership is measured by the moment you decide what matters most." The captain nodded silently because there was nothing left to defend. Rebecca Sloan stood motionless near the galley, watching every crew tablet remain locked under executive preservation status. The authority she had relied upon only minutes earlier had vanished without a raised voice or dramatic confrontation. She finally spoke. "I thought I was following company expectations." Danielle answered with complete honesty. "Policies do not create character. They reveal it. Every employee is responsible for questioning a process that treats people differently before it becomes normal." Megan Foster quietly held the backup tablet against her chest. Danielle turned toward her and offered the first genuine smile of the evening. "You protected the truth before you knew who I was. That is exactly the kind of judgment this company deserves." Megan shook her head modestly. "I only reported what I saw." Danielle nodded. "That is how every meaningful change begins." Jordan Ellis looked around the first-class cabin where strangers had become witnesses to something far larger than a seating dispute. Claire Bennett quietly stopped recording and slipped her phone back into her handbag. "I thought I was watching an argument," she said softly. "Instead, I watched a system expose itself." Danielle glanced through the aircraft window. Outside, dozens of Aurelia airplanes still waited at their gates beneath the evening sky. The temporary operational hold had delayed schedules across the country, but it had also preserved evidence that could never again be quietly rewritten. 30 minutes earlier, one flight attendant believed she was protecting the image of first class. 30 minutes later, an entire airline had stopped moving long enough to protect something far more valuable than its schedule. By the following week, the hidden C-17 classification had been permanently removed from every operating system. Independent auditors reviewed every reservation it had ever touched. Affected passengers received personal apologies, restitution where appropriate, and transparent explanations of the investigation. New reporting channels were established so that any employee could raise concerns directly to the Corporate Ethics Office without fear of retaliation. Megan accepted a position on the Service Improvement Task Force, helping redesign training around fairness, accountability, and evidence instead of assumptions. Danielle never issued a speech celebrating herself, never asked anyone to remember her title, and never suggested that the airline had been grounded because she was its chief executive officer. When reporters later asked why she had paused flights across the network, her answer was simple. An airline can recover from a delayed departure. It cannot recover if passengers stop believing they will be treated with equal dignity. Before leaving the aircraft that evening, Danielle paused beside seat 1 Alpha and looked once more at the quiet cabin where everything had begun. "Respect should never arrive after recognition," she said calmly. "If people only matter after you discover their position, then the problem was never their identity. It was your judgment." She picked up her laptop bag, thanked the crew members who had chosen integrity over comfort, and walked through the open aircraft door with the same quiet confidence she had carried onto the flight. Behind her, the airplanes would eventually take off again, but they would do so under a higher standard than the one that had existed 30 minutes before one calm passenger refused to surrender her dignity.